we're going to start out with a presentation on UW Stevens Point Wausau, also known as UW Marathon County for some of us diehards that just refuse to give in.
Would that be you, John?
That would be two of us here, so be careful. It's three of us. So, while history shouldn't be the enemy of innovation, history is important.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm Gretel Stock, Dean of University College and our Marshfield and Wausau campuses of UW Stevens Point. Happy to be here with you today to share the work of the Campus Utilization Work Group. This particular group is one that was chartered by the Chancellor to help address concerns about our space utilization and recommendations from the community members, members of the county board, members of the nonprofit sector in utilizing the space effectively. So I'm presenting today part of the presentation I gave to that group, and also have modified that for discussion amongst us today. Several of you have likely heard the update that we gave, I think it was over the summer, to the county board, or in the late spring, about our current Wausau campus enrollment, but I'd just like to review where we're going as an institution and what's changing in terms of our offerings on all of our campuses, but specifically in Wausau and Marathon County, as well as our Marshfield Wood County location. So we are focusing and continue to focus on bachelor's pathways for all students. That is what our student body is asking for. They're not coming to do a 2-year degree any longer. They're really coming to get started on a 4-year degree. And so that has shifted the particular programming that we offer, shifted the courses that we're offering, the modality in which those courses are offered. We are now offering courses both at the undergraduate and graduate level in hybrid and online formats, as well as in person. And we are working on bachelor's degree completion pathways with close partners such as NTC and other business partners. Our technology management degree was that was directly created with NTC as a way to help their graduates achieve a bachelor's degree in career growth. Multidisciplinary studies is another example that serves technical college students very well. And also working with partners to develop degrees in organizational leadership, strengthen our offerings in business, and offer in-demand nurses to our community as well. So our space needs have changed as a result. Our students aren't necessarily the wanting to come and stay on campus all day, looking for activities, looking for athletics. We are one of the many things that they have in their lives. So they are working mostly full-time, if not more than full-time. They have family obligations. They have college obligations. Even if they are a traditional age student, they behave more like one might consider an adult student. So we find that we need a combination of online, hybrid, and in-person courses to meet the needs of those students. So in terms of our space needs and the impact of the facility and that these joint committees have oversight on, we are using 21% of the current campus footprint to offer our core programming, and that is our core academic programming. Do we use additional pieces of the campus for rentals, for events, for other occasional activities? Sure. But our core day-to-day operations is utilizing approximately 21% of the campus. The breakdown of what is instructional and support square footage is listed there. The library is listed out separately just because it's a really big chunk, so we like to make sure that that is separated out. And so it shows what we're using, that 48,000 square feet, in terms of the total square footage of the campus. I will note that we still rent pretty frequently the CCE Theater. We have many community members, organizations who come and use that space. We happily support them and accommodate their rentals. There is also about 12,000 square feet under MOU with nonprofit entities or Universities of Wisconsin entities in the building. That includes the Madison PA program for physician assistants. It also includes WPR and includes the WIPS Center, which are both Universities of Wisconsin entities. Just like to remind people of who all lives on our campus with us. There's some other nonprofits. The Monk Gardens, for example, has offices with us, as well as a handful of other places. So in terms of the spaces that we are utilizing, what I'm showing you here is a map of our current campus arrangement. I will note that Marathon Hall is currently under management by the county, so it is still on our map because it's still there, but it is not a building that we actively program or manage. But we do have everything from Stewart Avenue, the CCE building, that the newer building, the entirety of North and South Halls that are the main academic building, the field house are in the 2 art studios on the south. All of that is the campus footprint. We are occupying if I were to condense our footprint down to its smallest area, we'd be occupying the Student Resource Center, kind of in the center of campus, a little bit of the Union and Library in the center of campus, and primarily in North Hall is where we have most of our operations right now. We have a couple of labs that happen in South Hall, but not to the extent that we have in the center of the building in North Hall. So I'll show you a couple of examples of the kinds of spaces that we are not utilizing at the moment and opportunities that we're having. The part of the work group the chancellor really wants advice from community members on how to best utilize these facilities, what type of facility, what's the vision, what's the cost structure. So I'm just going to quick run through a couple of the options just to show you what the buildings consist of that are currently not being utilized. So the art studio, I'm only showing the newer building because the older building really is best suited for industrial and storage purposes as opposed to something more occupiable, but it's also tied utilities and parcel-wise to the new building. So it's all kind of one package, but I'm not showing you that older building. If any of you have ever been in it, you know it's a great facility for art. It's a little crusty for other uses. But the art building has quite a few opportunities in that it is a full concrete floored facility, is powered in especially the rear lab, the sculpture and metal lab for industrial sculpture machines, industrial power. There's hood and ventilation in several of these rooms. So there's a great opportunity for a variety of uses in a building like this. The school district might be interested in looking at the space. They might not. They have a couple of programs that might be helpful in here. But again, this is an entire building, a self-contained building that's south of the field house that we are not utilizing for programming currently. There's also a greenhouse that's kind of attached to the South Hall, a beautiful 3-bay greenhouse facility that is available that, again, we are not programming. There's a greenhouse floor and then three individual bays that are currently hosting some campus houseplants, I think, to make sure that they're still alive, as some people's offices don't have the best sunlight for plants. So you see them with things in them, but those are things that are removed if someone ever wanted to use this for programming purposes or for other kinds of activities. Again, I mentioned we're not using the majority of South Hall. We are collaborating with the county on some uses for that building. But the South Hall primarily contains our physics, engineering labs, biology labs, chemistry labs, geography and geology labs. So a lot of open spaces, some with plumbing, some without, that have office suites among them in a fairly nice arrangement, especially an arrangement for people who are collaborating together, which is what the intent was, for students to collaborate with faculty in those spaces. And then, as I mentioned, in the main building, we are primarily using the main center building and north part of the building space for our educational programming, both the offices and other spaces. There are spaces we aren't utilizing as much in that space. One is we currently have an incubator in our dining services, but that is something where they're an incubator and they do rotate through as they launch or not launch activities. So we have a full commercial kitchen, including food storage, and 2 dining rooms associated with that. We also have the auditorium, the old auditorium, not the new theater, where we get most of our rentals. The auditorium is still a very, very functional space with a full lighting system that Chris Berg maintains, and still has space for about 120 people. So it's a great facility for either small productions or meetings. And we also have some interesting spaces like our planetarium. Fun fact, that equipment that's in there is not replaceable. It no longer exists, so the whole place would have to be retrofitted if it was a planetarium again. But it is a kind of a fun and neat space in there. If you want to go back to 1960s seating, you can definitely take a seat there and take a look. It's pretty fun. And then we have classrooms that we simply don't utilize as often. We do utilize the band room and music room for some community activities, and we cherish those activities. They needed to move to a different location because somebody wanted to use that wing on a more permanent basis. Those are conversations that we could have. We also have some rooms that I'm not showing here that are not utilized as heavily, but wanted to give you a sense for the spaces we were using and the ones that we are not using at the university right now. So again, I wanted to put the footprint up there, see if anyone had any questions before I step into what the work group has been doing, and then maybe some more in-depth questions that you may have. But is there any questions on the facility, or should I continue? All right, I will continue through the presentation. So Chancellor Gibson brought a campus working group, campus community working group together, seeking recommendations how to utilize the campus footprint in collaboration with community partners. We take the community part of our mission very seriously as a university in our whole area, and we know that when we merged with the Marathon County and the Marshfield-Wood County campuses, that was especially magnified because of the access mission and the mission of deep community engagement that those locations had. So on this group were 2 Marathon County board members. Lance Leonard served on this group. I served on this group as facilitator. We had folks from the University Foundation that supports the Wausau campus. We had the mayor who was on the group. We had Tim from the Community Foundation, and we had 2 representatives from the business community as well. So a great collection of folks who care deeply about the campus came to talk about the vision and the costs and where we could go from there. The purpose, as set by the Chancellor, was to talk about what the vision for the space should look like, to help align the costs with the vision with the costs to manage the facility, advise on partnership opportunities or aligned organizations that we could work with, and advise on a communication plan to advise stakeholders of the quality space available for partnership and the partnership opportunities with UWSP at Wausau. So where we are right now, we are at the very end of our process. A draft report is being vetted by the work group. In fact, I've asked for folks to get back to me by the end of day tomorrow with their final comments, and then I will get that off to the Chancellor right quickly after that, and then he'll have a chance to respond to the group. The vision is primarily that of a site for a higher education and professional development. So the group very much felt like the vision for the site, if it was to be used for that purpose, was primarily for education and that professional development, and that was a very important part of why that space is being supported by the county. We did identify some potential partners and some community strategies, and also talked about the financial costs and the financial impact of the facility. I have provided the combined document, or a snapshot of the combined document that we had that talked about those particular finances. I wanted to make a couple of notes here. First, we do not align at the university and county with our fiscal years, so I had to choose either to roll it forward or roll it back. So fiscal 2025 for UWSP is the fall of, or July 1, 24 through June 30, 25. And so I chose the annual 2024 fiscal year to line up with that. So they do line up, they're just a little jagged, but I had to put the Excel spreadsheet somewhere. So, but on an annual basis, the FY25 represents our budgeted expenses, not the actuals, but the actuals for the previous 3 years for the university are the actual dollars that we spent supporting the facility. So every year with all of our facility services, staff and personnel, our building maintenance personnel, the supplies and custodial services that we provide, all the grounds maintenance, we put in about $400,000 a year or so in direct personnel and maintenance costs, and also between $400,000 and $500,000 a year in utilities costs, depending on, and that's for the whole campus, depending on how the space is used. Those costs have gone up, of course, as everybody knows. Those escalation costs are hitting everybody, and the county has put in between CIP and the maintenance budget that's provided each year. It varies. This year is in 2024. The actuals are close to $333,000. In past years, it's been different depending on what systems and what work actually has had to be done. But this is a combination of like what it would actually cost to run the facility if we're running it on both a break-even basis for all costs involved. We're looking at prices per square foot that for just the university costs. We're looking at the $6.50 a square foot, and then you add on the county costs, and that starts to go up further from there, $7 to $8 per square foot. And that is just to cover costs. That's not investment in the facility. That's not capital growth. That's not things breaking. That is every year the costs that you would need to put in to just maintain the facility at its current level if nothing major happens. So that is an idea of the total fiscal picture of the facility from what we put into it directly. I will note that this does not represent any of our student service or instructional costs. The total budget currently budgeted for the campus is around $2.5 million, and that includes all instructional costs and all student services costs and all facilities costs included in that number. So this number is intended to give you an idea of the facilities cost versus our other costs, but we did not include our core programming in this. We were making assumptions about what the facility itself needs to maintain from a fiscal perspective. So next step, the work group's report's going to be finalized. The chancellor is going to consider the recommendations and then direct me and others to take some action steps along with the community. But we will be continuing robust conversations between the university and the county about current micro-facility issues as well as the macro concerns that we're trying to solve here as a community work group. So that's the presentation I have for you today. I would welcome any questions or any comments that you'd like to share regarding that I can support you with.
First of all, as a member of the task force, I want to thank the university for the opportunity to have that dialogue, and I think it's been helpful to us. I think we've all read about the 2-year campuses being closed in communities with very little notice, and I think we're fortunate to have the affiliation with UW Stevens Point and their willingness to engage the discussion in a path forward. But I think we are at a critical state where the future of that campus is in question. It's not sustainable at the current numbers, and it's not sustainable with the current square footage. And the county's discussion from a HR Finance Committee perspective is, what sort of investments do we make in the facility going forward? How do we best utilize the property in the context of the current leases? And from the EEDC perspective, how important is the campus relative to our ability to attract, retain, and retrain our workforce to meet the changing demands going forward? So again, this is a great opportunity for dialogue, but the county needs to define what its role will be going forward and how we will work with the university. But I want to, again, just express my appreciation, and Supervisor Moranch has been at all of the meetings, to the university for the opportunity to have the dialogue, not in a crisis moment, but rather in a thoughtful planning process. Stacy is.
Well said. And I agree. Thank you for your presentation, and it was nice to collaborate and get everybody's opinion and brainstorming put down. So just now we have to figure out where to go from here. Thank you.
I am very grateful for the county's robust participation in this process. It's been not undoable without your support, so thank you for being a part of it.
Supervisor Hart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to know if you could elaborate a little bit more on any discussions with local nonprofits utilizing those spaces. I know that there are a number of local nonprofits that are looking for housing, looking to expand, and I just wanted to know if that's already in the discussion or something that's going on to the future when we talk about next steps.
I'm going to tackle that because I've been the biggest. Our concern as the county is that we don't want to own buildings and do the capital maintenance on buildings that aren't meeting a mission for which they were constructed. And so what we've done is raise the concern about, before you start leasing to other parties, make sure that you are engaging the county in those discussions, because most often those nonprofits look for subsidies, but we're looking at potentially millions of dollars of investments in that facility. I think that this board needs to weigh in. If it's not an educational facility, what is it, and what charges will there be? Part of the plan was to identify potential partners going forward, but I think there are some strong concerns about changing the mission. I think the consensus of the work group is that it would be important to fulfill and continue that educational component, whether it's through UW Stevens Point, working with others. We threw out Vanderbilt, we threw out Harvard, we threw out, St. Lawrence, a number of other institutions. Are there opportunities for charter schools among charter school and others? Are there opportunities with the Wausau School District and others to look at it? But I think that one of the things that we have to do as a county board, and the two committees and the board ultimately, is decide, if not UW Stevens Point Wausau, then what and under what conditions?
If I can just add, I think to that point, one of the discussions that the work group, and I've attended the meetings as well, thank you for the opportunity, to Chair Robinson's point, that engagement from your administration standpoint, my recommendation would be to sit down with the UW and really pursue enhancing the clarity of the existing lease agreement between the county and the Board of Regents, to say, like, hey, before there is a sublease, there is a requirement for that affirmative engagement for the reasons that Chair Robinson referenced. It's not that there might be multiple millions of dollars of renovations needed. There are millions of dollars of renovations that will be needed for those buildings in the future. That is a guarantee. I mean, the future is a long time. You've spent millions of dollars just over the last couple of years. So we know that the investment the county has had in those facilities is significant. How do you ensure that there's alignment between the county's investment and the use of those buildings is to write that into the lease, that there needs to be a process through which the county board is informed and engaged in that. I think the discussion, as was alluded to, is very positive in terms of what does the mission continue to look like. We'll see what the chancellor comes back with in terms of kind of next steps for the university. But from the county's perspective, my recommendation, as I put in my work plan for some time, is really to clarify what that county role is going to look like and what that engagement would look like. I know in speaking with Gretel, there were some lease changes, updates that were made with some of the other campuses, at least one of the other campuses, that does have some specific requirements relative to subleasing. I think that's a good pattern for us to talk through and identify. So just to build on what the chair referenced.
Supervisor Lemmer.
So just to clarify, do we ever see a situation where UWSP would say we're only using 21%, that's all we want to have, and we are going to turn these buildings over to the county similar to the dorms? Or what do you foresee? Not, it's a crystal ball moment, I suppose, but.
I think that option's on the table. We're already having great conversations about how we can collaborate with the field house, how we can collaborate with other departments. So there's good conversations along that front. Certainly, we'd like to not be paying 100% of the utilities, and when we're using 21% of the space, that's a lot of money towards utilities. And that's money away from student support, right? Just frankly, that we can't support students if we're spending money where we're not utilizing it. So we have to be efficient as an organization. But again, I don't know, the chancellor hasn't seen these recommendations yet, so I don't know where he's going to sit. But he's been supportive of the conversations we've had so far around how we share spaces and how we work together towards co-programming or handing over programming of certain buildings.
Can you pull up the master, the map?
Sure. That's why I included it twice in the presentation.
So I think, I'm just going to interject we've been having the discussions about what to do with Marathon Hall, and there's been the discussions on, what do you do with the dorm? The field house, I think there are ongoing discussions about making that a community resource. There's been potential interest in the art studio. And can we peel those off? One of the dilemmas of the campus is it's a shared heating HVAC system. So it's not each building, but a master facility or master system for the campus, and that gets into logistics. But I think that the path forward would allow us to look at it. The whole issue of South Hall. Yeah, are there some opportunities in South Hall to separate it out? But those are the discussions that have taken place, and I think would merit from community investment. One of the things that we didn't really cover is that it is critical we boost the enrollment. And it would be great if the enrollment could get up to about 600 FTE.
That would be great.
Equivalents, because then it's self-supporting without a subsidy from the Stevens Point campus. So one of the goals of the task force was to look at ways to engage the community, the business community, and trying to get programming there that might attract people and to explore different options relative to funding students attending the campus going forward to boost that enrollment, to make it a value to the students and to the community. Included in that discussion is partnership opportunities with NTC, either on campus or a joint campus going forward. All of those, I think, have to be explored as we look to the future, particularly in light of what's happened across the state. Go ahead.
So talking about the NTC, can you talk a little bit about the difference in how those are funded, the UW system versus the TAC? Because I think there's some, I don't know, misunderstanding about how,
Sure.
and some assumptions that there's more investment being made in the NTC world than in the UW system world.
So first I'm going to say I love partnering with NTC. They're a great colleague. We work very closely together. We're in great ongoing conversations about how we can continue to partner. They are funded on a local tax levy. We are funded on a statewide by the state legislature. So the state legislature decides how much we have in our budget, and they say you go to town with that budget. If you pull apart the UW system budget and the NTC and the technical college system budgets and their local levies, the technical college system is supported in something like the top 10 in the nation in terms of amount of support, and we're in the 40s in the UW system in terms of, again, nationwide where we rank in terms of state support. Education's an ecosystem. You put us together, we're kind of about in the middle, but there is a difference in the amount of capital and funds that we have access to in our Stevens Point campus, how we fund building projects. All of that is because we're a state entity. There's a lot more of that bureaucracy and process that we have to go through, which is fine. We're using the state's dollars. They want that accountability. Okay, great. That's what we do. But it's a different kind of organizational structure where NTC is funded on the local levy. They can be very nimble. They can raise funds and go to town on things like their beautiful new addition to their dental facility for the dental assistant position that they're received a state grant for. So there's a lot of great stuff that they can do on the local level that's immediate, where our funding is based on a biennium, and so we get it every 2 years. We get a new budget. Was that some of what you're looking for? Or is there another clarifying question that you have on that front?
I'd just like to interject that the VTAE system does also receive significant state funding in addition to the property tax. So they have.
Yes, that is true.
They have three legs to the stool with state support, the levy, and tuition dollars, whereas the university is state support, endowments and the enrollment.
And I would, to make an already complicated system even more complicated, Gretel was talking about the UW system as the UW Stevens Point campus. The additional wrinkle you have with the local Stevens Point Wausau campus is that the facilities themselves are not funded through the state process that
Correct.
Gretel talked about. That's the process that funds the positions that operate within the campus, as well as the maintenance dollars that fund the very limited maintenance budget that UW Stevens Point Wausau campus, the UW Stevens Point Wausau allocates to the campus. Marathon County levy supports the capital upkeep of those buildings. So it's even more complex than the process that Gretel talked about. There is a world in which the county could apply through the same process that the UW system uses for special building commission dollars. We haven't historically done that, or certainly not been successful doing that. But that, again, is another wrinkle. Because of that lease agreement we have with the Board of Regents, we are responsible for the buildings and capital maintenance of those buildings. The UW system, the Board of Regents, is responsible for the staffing to deliver the educational experience on the campus. So another funding difference as opposed to the levy that NTC gets. It funds both those things in addition to the other funding options that Chair Robinson referenced. Your levy only goes to buildings. Marathon County government levy only goes to building maintenance. The UW funding through the biennial budget that Gretel talked about goes to funding the staff and limited maintenance budget. So additional wrinkle.
Are Marshfield and Wausau the only satellite campuses for UWSP?
Yes. We have several field locations, but they are wholly managed and owned by the university. So we have a field location in Amherst and in Rhinelander for our CNR program, and we also have a fisheries location up in Ashland, but those are wholly managed by the university. But as far as satellite campuses received in the reorganization, yep, it's Marshfield, Wood County, and Marathon County that came to us.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Being new to the board, and not a lot of experience, but I'd like to know, okay, worst case scenario. What's the worst case scenario that could happen? The county gets those buildings back? They own them? You pull out as a university? What's the worst case scenario? Best case scenario, I'm sure, is having the classrooms full and full-time equivalents and managing itself, but that isn't happening yet. So the opposite side of the spectrum, what would happen in the worst case scenario?
Well, I think you've seen that with some of our sibling institutions across the state. Although I feel like this conversation, we're already a step better than that if and I'm not saying we are, if something did happen where we would exit some of those buildings, we've already started to have positive conversations. And so I can't imagine my chancellor not being transparent about where we are, right? I know it caught some of our sibling institutions partners by surprise but they are in a very different financial position than Stevens Point is. So I think you've seen the worst case, and I think then it would be up to the county of how to manage those facilities going forward. I'm not going to foreshadow anything because the reason the chancellor asked us to engage in this process is to be in the best position forward to continue to be an educational partner at our current campus.
And if I can, again, it is a complex relationship. So best case scenario you reference is, their campus is full. Yes, best case scenario. That doesn't mean that the university buildings don't require the capital maintenance investment from the county, because the UW doesn't write, if there are 600 students versus 200, Marathon County doesn't get a direct check to it to put toward facility dollars in either instance. But to your point about worst case scenario, I think, again, Gretel did a nice job of saying, you've seen other campuses close, and then what the counties have done is you react and you determine what the future use of those buildings is going to be. And that is, again, a wide spectrum of what that could be. Everything from the county taking on, doing directly what in this current environment, UW Stevens Point Wausau, or UW Stevens Point is doing, which is looking for partners to align with that educational mission, which is the advice of the work group. The county could do that directly, or you could turn around and just sell the buildings. Or you could turn around and repurpose the buildings for something that you might think to be in your strategic vision of what you want those to do and use them in a different way. So again, wide variety of options. Should there be a exit stage left of the university? But I think, I'll give you my sense. If I was in the chancellor's shoes, I'd be doing exactly what he's doing. Being very transparent and saying, we don't need 100% of this facility. It's imagine yourself post kids and you still have a big house and at the same time your revenues may be going down. You start to look at, hey, what's the best decision I can make? That's what they're doing. I mean, they don't use a lot of the facility. The discussion at the work group, to be very candid, and I apologize, I had to step out for a bit, but the purple part of the building, you need a very close alignment. If you're going to partner with somebody, that was the discussion. In that section of the building, in that section of the campus, you need very close alignment mission-wise with whoever's going to be there. As you move out, your options kind of become, the options for the university and the county collectively become a bit more open, right? I mean, the art studio on the far bottom, like there's perhaps that alignment that is needed is less. Marathon Hall, you could do other things with that if you green space that and look for housing options. It's hard to deliver university education experience in a portion of that, the purple building, the main building, and have something completely separate happening across the hallway. Very difficult, not good for anyone. So that was the discussion, and I think the chancellor's approach with the work group, logical sense. That's what I would be doing. We should still have a conversation about what the county wants to do in terms of lease alignment. What does that process look like? And look at the options. Marathon Hall is entirely under the county purview right now. The county just approved, you'll see at the top of that slide, to campus parking lot A. That's no longer campus parking lot A, that the city just recently purchased. Again, as you move out from the heart of the campus, your opportunities are more open. The university has been very good over the last several years of saying, hey, we no longer need this. They told us a number of years ago, they told the county, Marathon Hall is no longer vital to our operations. They said this is no longer subject to our lease. Do with it what you will. So I anticipate that to continue, quite honestly. Kind of like the work group came to that conclusion.
And again, that work group, every member of that work group saw a vision where the campus remained a campus of higher learning. The question is what's the footprint and what's the role of the county going forward? And I think what we need to have, the discussion we need to take place at the county level is what's our appetite for continuing to invest in the facilities? Are there opportunities for us to repurpose some of those facilities working in alignment with UWSP, particularly those facilities south of Garfield Avenue, I would say, and potentially a greenhouse, and potentially a portion of South Hall. What can we do to support those efforts to attract new students, and both as an employer, a partner in terms of a government entity, and our role in the community and trying to get others to rally around scholarships and other things to make it more attractive for students to go there. I think those are the questions that we really have to talk about at the committee level, and what's our willingness relative to the HVAC system to make modifications or to participate differently in how some of those costs are borne. Supervisor Lemmer.
Well, I think, I've said this before, Marathon County is almost the last house in the end of a dead-end road, and they don't get very many trick-or-treaters, so you have to have big candy bars if you want to get trick-or-treaters coming. And I think we really need to keep this as an educational facility if we are not going to be beyond the last house at the end of the dead-end road. But I can't help but feel a little, I guess, confused, maybe hamstrung by not being able to have more agency in what we can do with these buildings. Has anybody talked to Madison? Because when I look at Marathon County, I see a rich history in medicine, our rich history in agriculture and our rich history in manufacturing. And they have programs that could have graduate level things. Maybe that's the way to get students up, because I don't know what kind of degrees Stevens Point has, but I don't know that they've got, anything in those three areas. At least maybe some engineering, I'm not 100% sure, but that way we could get the business community to weigh in and maybe keep some of our high schoolers who want that prestigious college experience. Vanderbilt, I don't know what they have for those three programs, but I really lean heavily on the agricultural piece and research for climate safe farming practices and dealing with the new reality of AI in that. I think it'd be such a perfect marriage.
I think those are all items that are on the table. I think we want to be cognizant of the fact that the campus is there because of the support of UW Stevens Point. So the focus going forward has to be UW SP focused with, if you will, tentacles or different areas out, because if we lose their support, the campus isn't a campus, and it'll be much more difficult for us to do that. But I think that there are opportunities to work with Platteville and Stout and other campuses, Madison, relative to programming.
And if I could, we currently work with Madison for the PA program. So they've seen a market opportunity here in the Northwoods. They have physician's assistant programs. I think there's 13 students, 14 students in the program right now. They have a size-limited cohort. We've had work with Platteville in their PEP program, where they bring people, they can stay here and get their engineering degree. We've had a few students go through that program. It's been very successful for those who needed to go through it. So we're not opposed to partnering with folks where it makes sense. We do have excellence in data science, and we're starting a program in AI, by the way, which is great, a bachelor's degree. We're very excited about that. It hasn't passed Board of Regents yet, so it's still in the discussion stages, obviously, until that passes, hopefully soon. But we are also able to understand and meet some of the needs that you mentioned. But of course, there are other experts that if there's the market, we welcome our sibling institutions to come and be a part of a thriving campus. They will then compensate us for the support that we give them in the space. So there's that kind of component of it as well. They don't come to us for free. They come to us with an agreement that's mutually beneficial. So yeah, we're absolutely open to that.
But are those conversations being had? I guess is my specific question.
Well, the working group information hasn't gone to the chancellor yet. So these additional explorations are things that are coming up. Certainly every time our sibling institution colleagues have come to us and said, hey, we'd like to do this thing, we've been able to accommodate them.
So we're working off a 1970s lease that probably is somewhat outdated. And we're working within a building footprint that is no longer reflecting the actual utilization. So I think one of the challenges that we will have as a county, and we'll have to work with Chris on this, is as we move forward, what sort of investments will we be needing to make in the facilities, and what sort of requirements would we want relative to tenants of that, and what's the county's willingness to open up that campus with it, working in partnership with UWSP to fill it and to make it more cost effective to operate. So I think that'll be the challenges, and I think we would look to the EEDC to guide the economic development, education, and supporting the community perspective, and the HR finance will look at the investments in the facilities. But we've been asking the question for years, as we look at the capital expenditures, what is our long-term commitment from the university system relative to the campus? And I think this discussion is a start in the right direction relative to aligning the counties and the university systems and Stevens Point's mission going forward and their vision. And I think it's a great start.
I agree, and I guess I would like to just discuss more about, and not necessarily today, but soon, on what to do with the field house and what to do with Marathon Hall, because the longer we put that off, it's just costing us money. So I think there is great benefit for the whole community to reimagine the field house and have more programming there. There's been a lot of requests from the community for just more recreational space for kids, things to do for that. And I think that we need to discuss taking down Marathon Hall so that we can reutilize that lot.
So I think once that report, the task force report, or the chancellor finalizes it, we will share that with the committees and move forward. But we thought it was important to have both committees discuss where we're at, so you've got a good baseline of understanding. There are challenges, but there are opportunities. And again, I want to just express my appreciation to UWSP, Gretel, and the chancellor for the willingness to have this dialogue prospectively.
Thank you very much. Oops, wrong button. There we go.
So the next item is tax increment financing, and I'm going to try to set some context relative to it. And you received two items in the packet that were put in. One is a report that was given by Supervisor Overbeck relative to the task force recommendations relative to the tax increment financing law, and the second one was a resolution and questionnaire developed by Peter Weinschenk, who's been the conscience of the county board for years and continues in retirement. So we'll talk about that. But does everybody have a working understanding of tax increment financing? So we'll give a very high-level overview, and you can ask questions. But tax increment financing was created in the 1970s by the legislature in an effort to try to provide a tool to local units of government relative to the redevelopment of blighted areas. It was used in Wausau for the development of the mall, and it's been used throughout others. And this chart sort of represents what happens is you create a tax increment district. You set the boundaries of the district, and you develop a plan, a project plan, for how you will spend dollars in that district for public improvement and other related activities. And then you go into, you have tax increment financing. And what the tax increment financing is, you basically establish a base level of valuation for that district based upon the date in which it was created, January 1st of the year in which it was created. So hypothetically, let's take the old mall. It was the city bought the property, tore it all down, so the base was relatively low because the city owned and the property was exempt. Any growth in that valuation is captured by the community creating the tax increment financing plan. So in the thought is that increment would go to pay for the investment made in the public works associated with that project. Other taxing entities, including the schools, the counties, and others, forego the incremental increase in associated with the increased valuation. Again, that money is captured to pay off the bonds associated with the work. Over the years, there was no more than 5% of a municipality could be in it. Then it was 7%, then 12%. And there are exceedances in the statutes. The money had to be spent within 5 years, 7 years, 23 years. There are exemptions that were granted under the statutes. The use has expanded. There are 40 active tax increment districts in Marathon County today. There have been a good number of additional ones. I think what happens is the The entity proposing the district develops a plan, and they present that plan to the Joint Review Board. The Joint Review Board is made up of the school district, the local community, I believe the technical colleges, and the county, and one citizen member advanced by the proposing entity. So that 5-member board reviews the plan, approves it, and then there are annual reports that need to go to the Department of Revenue for associated with it. There is the ability to amend plans, extend the life of districts. I think some of the concerns have been over how many extensions can you have? When do the other entities get to share in the growth associated with that? So if you create a district and we don't receive any of the taxes from it, we're shifting the responsibility on the other taxpayers, and that's been a concern. That led, I think, some of the concerns led to the creation of a task force on the county to bring in different parties to evaluate. Lisa Rasmussen represented the city on that. Dave Overbeck represented the county, and there were a good number of other members on that provided input. And the recommendations were included in here. And I think, quite honestly, Peter's going to talk about most of those, or many of those recommendations. And technically, tax increment financing districts should be created only for the purposes of trying to facilitate development that would not occur without the creation of the TIF. It's called the but-for argument. Without that, or but without that, it would not have proceeded. I think there have been some concerns about whether or not all projects have met that standard. But we'll get into a discussion of what the county's role. The county's representative on that joint review board has historically been the finance director. I think we may have adopted a resolution at one time designating the finance director. The question is who should that person be? What is the role of the various committees? Does the EDC committee have an interest in it from the perspective of economic development and weighing in? Do we want to identify policies that must be met if we're going to participate? I know there was not too long ago, Weston had proposed a TIF, and I wasn't involved in it, but I had asked, are these wages going to be living wage jobs? Are there some requirements that we would want to have so we're not using taxpayers' subsidies to create jobs that are minimum wage jobs? Are there some other factors that we might want to evaluate or strongly suggest the forming entity might want to follow? But the legislature has made a number of changes in the last budget. Personal property has been taken off the tax roll, so there need to be adjustments to the base level. There are changes going forward relative to the local units of government ability to capture the increment in their levy. Again, the levy is frozen, but relative to capturing that, there was a change where only 10% could be captured for those created after December 31st of this year. I think that led to a number of communities looking to try to create or amend TIFs before December 31st of this year. And that will go up to 25% if it closes within 75% of the life. One of the other statutory changes is they want the Joint Review Board to set a time frame during which that TIF will operate. So is it 20 years? Is it 22 years? Is it 27 years, 28 years? What is it? That's a very high-level overview. I see Randy nodding. You work with us on a daily basis. Is there anything you'd like to add?
I think from a high-level perspective, you did a really good job. I have a light. I think from a high-level perspective, you did a really good job of explaining it. It's taken me many, many years to get to a detailed level, and there's so much changing with it constantly, as well as best practices to it, that if we wanted to really dig into it, we would need to spend a lot more time and dedicate a lot more meetings.
Just by way of background, the Legislative Fiscal Bureau puts together periodically updates on the tax incremental financing law, and the last one was January of 2023. But Department of Revenue also has good statistics relative to TIFs and the valuation and what the impact is. And again, there are 40 in the county, in Marathon County right now. Many communities have multiple TIFs. Or TIDs, tax increment districts. So any questions? If not, Peter, do you want to? I invited Peter to come forward, and again, I think he captured much of what the task force recommended. We can go back to that after his presentation.
Good afternoon, supervisors. Am I on?
Yep, you're good.
Good. My name is Peter Weinshank. I live in Edgar, and I'm here today to ask you to reform tax increment finance. TIF is a practice where municipalities subsidize development by giving businesses and individuals a property tax break. Tax incremental districts, TIDs, are subject to a common flaw. They grow too slowly. And when they grow too slowly, two things happen. First, municipalities don't get the new tax base they had planned on. Second, citizens don't get the tax relief they're promised. The Wausau Center Mall provides a classic example of how a TID that doesn't meet growth expectations goes wrong. The 1981 project financed demolition of 67 downtown Wausau storefronts and apartments, replacing them with a large indoor mall that offered national brand merchandise to all of north central Wisconsin. Property taxes on the mall did eventually repay the city of Wausau for the cost of the project. We're talking about building demolition and streets and utilities and parking structures, that sort of thing. But the project never repaid taxpayers for all the years these citizens paid extra for government services because the mall paid nothing. Now, mall consultants specifically promised citizen tax relief when they originally pitched the project to city leaders. But they also predicted the mall would eventually enjoy a taxable value of $636 million. Instead, the mall's taxable property peaked at $84 million, and in 2021, the mall's 38th year, the value fell to a paltry $9.6 million. It was at this point that the city of Wausau bulldozed the mall. In doing so, the city buried the consultant's promise of mall tax relief. In my personal case, I wound up paying a net $110 in property taxes on my home in Edgar to subsidize the Wausau Center Mall. I received no tax relief. One of your colleagues, Gary Gisselman, a Wausau resident, also received no tax relief. His net property tax subsidy was $603.36. So with lackluster TIF outcomes, not just in Wausau, but across the county, the Marathon County Board of Supervisors created a tax incremental finance task force in 2023. The task force concluded that TIF continues to be a valuable economic development tool, but that generally speaking, county TIDs underperform and their lifespans are too long, harming both local government and county taxpayers. Now, the task force, and I attended a number of their meetings, never voted on a recommendation, but I believe reached a consensus in support of a suggestion made by Task Force Chairman Dave Oberbeck to reform TIF. His suggestion is to have all future county TIDs meet 10 standards. This 10 standards come from the Department of Revenue's TIF manual. The standards call on TIDs to be economically beneficial, consistent with comprehensive plans, structured to repay taxpayers for subsidies in a timely fashion, and affordable to the municipality over the long term. The standards call for use of written developer agreements to protect the interests of the municipality. Here's how the standards would work. The Joint Review Board, a state-required 5-person panel tasked with approving TIDs, would use a questionnaire to determine whether any proposed TID meets 10 standards. Should a TID not meet a standard, the TID proposal would be sent back to the municipality for revision. This procedure is patterned after how Marathon County reviews zoning requests. Under this plan, the county would take a TIF leadership role. The county would need to meet with village board, city council, school board, and tech board members to convince them to tell their representatives on the Joint Review Board to use the 10 standards approach. I have drafted, it's in your packet, a resolution to support the TIF 10 standards. Further, I have drafted a 10 standards questionnaire to be used by the Joint Review Board when evaluating any future TID. Now, state government has recently pulled on the reins when it comes to TIF. It has shortened up TID lifespans, and in an important development, ordered that after January 1st, 2025, it will be the Joint Review Board, not the municipality, to determine the lifespan of any individual TID. The 10 standards review will make it easier for the Joint Review Board to set TID lifespans. In my resolution, I recommend that the repayment of taxpayers in their TID investment not exceed 38 years beyond the base year of a TID. This recommendation is based on what happened with the Wausau Center Mall. Now is the time to reform TID and TIF. Taxpayers in this county spent $28 million in property taxes to support 39 TIDs in 2023. I guess we got an extra one over the net last year. With this investment, taxpayers subsidized business, employment, and housing, but also 13 TIDs whose lifespans have needed to be extended due to the lack of scheduled growth. No banker would stay in business with this track record. We can do better by making future TIDs meet 10 standards. The average Marathon County household property taxpayer paid $321.13 in 2023 for TIF. That taxpayer deserves a return on investment. I urge the county to support my resolution.
Let me just put some numbers in context. The TIF valuation and this was ironically in the material that Kevin Lang had put into it was put into the presentation for the infrastructure, but Marathon County has just under $1.4 billion in TID increment that basically goes to support the tax districts. And Department of Revenue also creates a tax increment financing valuation limitation report, and we've got some communities in the county that are at 20% of their equalized valuation in the TIDs, 22.42, 27.84, 14.75, some much lower, but there is a heavy reliance in some of the communities on the use of TIF and TIF financing, which impacts others because you're shifting the cost. And I will disagree with one comment that you made. The developers do pay taxes. So while they freeze the value of the base value of the TIF when it's created, the entity owning the property continues to pay the mill rate for all of the other governing units, for the city, for the county. The difference is that money is captured and diverted back into paying for it. So it's not that they're given a tax break, they're given basically a tax subsidy for those activities. So
Can I respond?
yeah.
Normally, what happens, if a business wanted to put up a building, they would go to the city, they would get a zoning agreement, and they would expect to pay special assessments for any infrastructure needed to accommodate that building. The glory and the curse of TIF is that, yes, those property taxes on that new development, there are property taxes on that new development, just like any other property tax, but instead of that business paying those special assessments for curb and gutter and sidewalk and whatever, their property taxes goes to pay for those improvements. What that means is that because that property tax is diverted, the need for police and fire and streets and roads and everything else, schools, the county, that new development pays nothing towards that, even though they might be increasing the need for greater governmental services. I would respond to John's statistics. Why do we have communities like the city of Wausau with 22% of the value in TID? It's because once you start taking property off the tax roll to pay for all these different projects, and you have an increased need for services, then it's a dog trying to catch its tail. You wind up going further and further and further behind. The guy who's putting up the TIF that replaces the Wausau Center Mall, his proposal is now private TIFs. Government has it, local municipality has nothing to do with it. All the risk would be on that private individual, but what's the point? The point is that if it's a private TIF, you can get around a state law that says you can't create a TIF if you have over 12% of your value in tax incremental finance.
Wausau is actually at 13.73%, not at 22, but Supervisor Lemmer.
So I would also wonder what the role is on things like the tourism that came in from the mall. I was employed by a couple of businesses in the mall, so that benefited me, and there was definitely sales tax. things like that. So I'd love to see an equation that really shows all of those costs and the benefits. But I guess my question would be really for Chris Holman, if he is so willing to talk about how this would impact him as he serves on the Joint Review Board right now. Is that correct still?
Sam attends those Joint Review Board meetings based on her role as finance director. As Chair Robinson referenced, the past direction from the board, consistent with state statute, is that the finance director attends those, absent alternative recommendation and action by the board. So we can bring Sam in and talk about how she interprets the information provided through the Joint Review Board and what process she uses now. But I think to the point that Chair Robinson referenced, if there is specific guidance that, or specific consideration beyond that which is currently being used and set forth in statute that you want the county's representative to employ, I suggest we have that discussion and you provide that direction, but Sam currently attends those.
Randy?
I think listening to the presentation, my microphone's not working, is it? I think in listening to what was presented to us, I can agree with some of the concepts that were brought forward. One of the most important things for a successful tax increment district is the upfront planning and making sure that you have good numbers and you're basing your decisions off of, in most cases, hopefully agreements that are already in place and you're just working into those. The number of districts within the county that I've seen that have the most issues were cases where you had a municipality that was being misled in terms of what the potential for it was and putting in a lot of infrastructure costs that became debt before anything was ever finalized, or development deals that fell apart. We're never going to be able to completely, make a secure TID, but some of the things that were presented just in terms of the numbers, and I think there's a lot of opinions and suggestions in terms of the numbers presented. TIF is often used on projects that can't be fully funded by the private sector, and the public sector needs to get involved in that. And in a lot of cases, there's a community value to that. Just using the mall example, think about all the sales tax that was generated for the county during that time. Think about all the tourism and traffic that we brought in from northern Wisconsin, the UP, that came to Wausau and spent their money in a lot of different ways. I don't know how the math works out. It's tough for me to follow, but I think we look at those other concepts, and I don't think we're here today to talk about the Wausau Mall project, but I think there are ways with our review process and the direction that we provide our finance director in reviewing and their participation on the Joint Review Board that can benefit not only the county, but all the other overlying tax jurisdictions. In my time, and I've sat in a lot of Joint Review Board meetings, I can tell you just about every one of them, the county representative was the most prepared and asked the best questions. So I think the county is head and heels above what some of the other areas are doing. But just that planning aspect and making sure what's in there, what's being presented, seems reasonable that they have things in line. Some of the worst projects I've seen, like I talked about before, were, yes, we're going to build roads and business is going to come. Those are the ones that fail. It's got to be good planning up front. I think that's something that we can work with our finance director to show and make sure that as part of their review process that that's hitting.
I just want to piggyback, and I think every report that I've seen have indicated that tax increment financing is a valuable economic development tool. The question is, are there criteria that should be applied to the evaluation of the creation of the district and the adoption of the plan and the duration of the plan? Supervisor Moran.
So I have a question. What happens if a business that is participating in a TIF goes bankrupt or closes? What happens then? What are the ramifications?
Well, the taxes are, again, based upon the property valuation. So if they became delinquent, you would go through the tax deed process. What you I think one of the concerns that I've had is, ironically, I'm going to use Walgreens as an example. Walgreens has gone to a number of communities to ask them to invest infrastructure in a facility to get them to locate where they are. And I think Walgreens tends to locate because of traffic volume, not necessarily TIF, but they will then go in and through a third party many times challenge the equalized valuation. And if you remember the old dark store arguments where they would try to drive down the cost based upon stores that weren't operating to lower it, so it jeopardized the financial viability of the TIF because it was devalued and therefore the revenues generated won't be there. But the county, let's say hypothetically, if somebody went out of business and bankrupt and didn't pay it, the county buys the tax bill or each year, and it would go into our tax delinquent property. We would eventually, hopefully, be made whole through the sale or the payment by the future owner or through the sale of that through the tax delinquent property process. There's no guarantees, but that would be the hope.
But then going further, what would happen if that was like an anchor business for that TID? The municipality would not have the money it needed to pay off this loan. And so the municipality would wave the red flag, and there would be a meeting of the Joint Review Board to agree to extend the life of that TID. And hopefully within, it was supposed to be like 27 years. Well, now it's 38 years. 1/3 of the TIDs in Marathon County have had their lifespan extended for various reasons. The growth was just too slow.
Scott?
Yeah, I think for our purposes on the Joint Review Board, the county official should be looking at county interests pretty much only. I don't want to be telling municipalities what to do in their vision for the future, so I don't know how they would feel about it. It would be good to have somebody who might have a contrarian view give us some information as well. So I don't know if that would be possible before a vote or anything like along those lines.
I know that Supervisor Marshall couldn't be here. She'd like to see some changes, including changing the boundaries on extended TIFs. If they ask for an extension, to try to reduce the size of the TIF on the extension. But I think we can only do what we can do. So there are a number of recommendations that were made. Some of those are policy. Some of them are procedural, and some of them are legislative. And so the policy ones can be done at the board level. The procedural ones would be, we can direct administration to do things. One of the problems is that many times when amendments come in, there's a short window in which you can review and comment on them, and it doesn't necessarily give room for committee review. So that's where the policy becomes important. I think Peter has advocated, and we put in your packet his resolution, and he's got it here before you today, along with the questionnaires. Is that something that the county would like to see as a policy going forward, understanding that those are in the Department of Revenue's guidelines or their manual going forward? And we would ask our member of the Joint Review Board to come in. And one of the other asks of the task force was to have an annual report on where tax increment financing districts are in the county once a year, either at a committee or full board meeting. Again, $1.4 billion of increment in the county. Would you want to report on that? Those are some of the policy discussions we may want to have going forward. Do we want to require, or ask the legislature to consider requiring Joint Review Board committee of all changes, modifications, et cetera? I think some of those, you began to see some tightening up in the last session of the legislature, but that would be a role for the executive committee to then ask the legislature to consider making those changes. Do you want to cap the total valuation? community evaluation in TIDs, tax increment districts, et cetera. Those are all discussions that could take place at the committee level. But I think, Scott, to get at your point, I think what we need to do is begin to have that discussion of framing the policy so we can direct that staff person to represent what this board wants. Randy?
I think the suggestion about having an annual report to the county board, or whether it's the county board, both of these committees, whatever, I think that's a really great idea. One of the positive changes that I think happened in the last few years was this legislator requiring an annual joint review board meeting. Just having that reporting, having them, keeping them aware of what's happening within each individual district's or each individual municipalities' districts, I think that's really beneficial. I feel bad for the county that has to attend all the different meetings around. It adds up with a July 1 deadline. But I think that was one really positive change in making sure that things are staying at the top of people's minds as they're looking at it. I think one important thing when we're considering what our decision is, our policy is in utilizing and how we are involved in tax increment districts, tax increment financing, is understanding there's very limited tools that we have as municipalities within the state of Wisconsin for economic development. And unfortunately, sometimes I think tax increment financing, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And there's some times that we could be making better decisions in how things are set up, how the money's used, how extensions are used. I think it's a bit of an overstep to legislators continually looking and continually making changes every session to what they have and what their regulations are. I think it's a bit of an overstep for us to get too involved in that process. But one thing that I will say that I don't think that's being discussed as part of what's being brought forward here today is the cost of doing nothing. Now, I've traveled around the Midwest, a lot of different places and different outdoor adventures, and there's a whole lot of places around the Midwest that you get to them and you see what once was. And places that don't adapt die. If we could use that same example of the mall, what kind of position would we be in today as a county, in the city of Wausau, in the metro area, the whole county, if we just let that building sit there? What would we be at in 10 years? By coming in, utilizing tax increment financing to revitalize that area, provides life. We know we have a worker shortage in Marathon County. If we just have empty buildings like the mall sitting around, that's not going to do anything to draw in talented, innovative people to our area. So those are some things to consider as part of this discussion as well. It's not all a doom and gloom tool. There are some bad examples. There are some bad scenarios that have played out. But for the most part, it's been very successful in keeping us where we are today.
Let me just put some context on why we're meeting jointly, because the whole idea for the TIF task force originated at the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee, and then the report came back to them. But given the fact that it is so directly tied into economic development, and that many of the policies would probably fall within the purview of the EEEDC committee, we thought this was a good way to basically accept the report, begin to look at how we might go about implementing aspects of it and formalize the process and policies going forward. I would anticipate that EEEDC would be in the lead relative to the resolution, the proposal put forth by Mr. Weinschenk.
Yeah, I think that the point here is not to get rid of TID. It's just to make it more successful and to think about the taxpayer. And to Randy's point, to use better planning. We could have a long, interesting discussion. Before the mall, there were storefronts and apartments. Then you had the mall, and now there's another TID to have storefronts and apartments. Were we able really to predict the future and do the right thing over time? It's a good discussion. But I think if we do a better job up front, we'll all be happier in the end. The the apartment building that they're putting up. Will taxpayers ever see a return on investment? If a typical schedule for on taxes is like 30 years. But even after 38 years for the Wausau Mall, the taxpayers never got out of the hole. So 30 years from now, will there be enough value there to really reimburse taxpayers for the real investment in their property taxes that they're making? That needs to be discussed up front. So that's what the 10 standards are about, is good planning based on what the Department of Revenue would recommend, and then to try and get the culture of the Joint Review Board to take a wider viewpoint.
Well, I just want to thank you for putting all of that together and presenting today. I think it's a great framework, and I think we'll be discussing it in the very near future, probably January.
Very good, thank you. Anything else?
Any other questions? If not, thank you all. I think we sort of talked about the options for the county and the next steps, so I think Supervisor Marassi would look for your committee then to take this and run with it.
That's the plan. Thank you.
All right, that would take us to item 7 from the Human Resource Finance Committee perspective. Was that a motion, Supervisor Lemmer?
It went from 4 to, well, yeah, it's.
Or 5, I'm sorry, 5? Yeah, 5. A high 5. Is there a second from the Finance Committee? Second by Supervisor Hart. All those in favor of adjournment from HR Finance will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. That motion carries.
Okay, and we have a motion from Supervisor Hagan and a second from Supervisor Rosenberg to adjourn. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right. Have a good evening, everyone.
This was a